A radio show host in Seattle called Paul Gallant.
You are definitely living in the hindsight world today, Paul.
Do you feel there's been a consistent theme with the interceptions?
I think every interception really has a different story.
I was just kind of curious what Paul gets to see.
You got f***ing grow, mother. Are you kidding me?
Paul Gallant, what the hell is wrong with you?
Hello and welcome aboard another episode of the Gallant Says podcast, available live, generally, weekdays 1 to 1:30 at twitch.tv/Gallant Says and youtube.com/Paul Gallant, but also available in podcast form, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. It is Wednesday, February 15th of 2023. I wanted to touch on something really quickly as our audience builds up with the live stream. I saw an article that came out in the Seattle Times, a city that I used to live in. And I got to say, if, there's such thing as fake news, this is some of the most bullshit I can remember ever seeing. The article is titled, "The Seattle Freeze is Thawing. In 2023, Seattle singles want love." Look at this fucking graphic. Begins, written by Von A. Fair. "Is romance dead? Ask any single in Seattle and you'll likely get a reluctant affirmative. Everyone has an opinion as to why. The dating pool is shallow. There are too many tech workers and people from California. It's demanding, demoralizing. But maybe dating in Seattle is turning a new leaf." Dating expert and matchmaker Cora Boyd says, even the Seattle freeze is thawing a bit. A recent match study that interviewed 5,000 single people between the ages of 18 and 98 shows that might be the case, with over 75% of singles in Seattle looking for a meaningful relationship in 2023. There's some spiel about how every city thinks their city is the worst. Seattle is second in singles looking for a relationship. Houston ranks 7th. Okay. So let's just pause for a second. Yes, there's a lot of people looking to date. That doesn't mean that the people in Seattle are actually going to find people to date. Speaking from experience, and I like to think of myself as decent looking, 6.5, 7. If I'm being totally honest. I found it very difficult to make much headway with anybody in that city. It's very much you meet once, the next step is determined on that one date. That's what drove me crazy about it. Because you meet somebody, generally, the first date is just bullshit, right? It's you getting to know that other person, but it's like really surface level. Everyone's on their best behavior. Everyone looks their best. You don't know that person at all. And not to pat myself on the back, but I feel like I'm pretty good when it comes to first dates. And outside of the first person I dated when I was in Seattle, Jessica, or the last person I dated when I was in Seattle, Chelsea, who really was cool, but then I moved. I would say that the vast majority of people I dated in Seattle, I got maybe 1 to 2 dates with them. That's it. I don't know why, but it's unlike anything I've dealt with here in Houston. And I think it largely has to do with the fact that people in Seattle are, 1, low-key intolerant when it comes to people who have different opinions than theirs. And 2, they're very choosy in a city that doesn't have, I guess, maybe that many options. I know for me, browsing, I wasn't exactly thrilled with the options, because there were some people who asked me, why do you root for Tom Brady? Don't you know he's a Nazi? And I was like, I'm from Boston. Of course I root for Tom Brady. You're disgusting, unmatched. Or, have any slightly moderate or leaning right take, and Jesus Christ, someone's going to jump down your throat. And I also think that there's a choosiness, and it has to do with the fact that there just aren't as many attractive people in Seattle. No offense. There aren't. Texas might have some large people, but Texas also has better looking people. I think the further south you go, the better looking people go. Anyway, this idea that people in Seattle are looking for relationships, yes, but actually getting into them, zero chance, because there is such thing as a Seattle freeze. People really don't like to get to know you up there. Here in Houston, they do. And now you know. Earlier today, I did an interview on my radio show, ESPN 97.5 and 92.5, with Evan Drellich of The Athletic. Drellich wrote a book called Winning Fixes Everything. It's a detailed timeline of how sign stealing became the norm in baseball. It is a really interesting book to this point. I haven't been able to read it like a traditional reader. Essentially, yesterday I found a PDF version of the book and I did Control F and looked for things about the Yankees and looked for things about the Dodgers because as someone who works here in Houston, I have found it frustrating that a sign-stealing scandal that seems to have been rampant across baseball has focused most of its energy on the Houston Astros. And it got to a certain point in this interview where, and I got to go back to the exact point in the interview right here. Hang on, let me cue it up.
30.
I think this had 11 minutes in or something like that, where I asked Evan how deep essentially the rabbit hole goes, because it does feel like the Astros were singled out above other teams, and I just have a hard time buying into the idea that no other teams were doing it. Maybe the Astros did it more than everybody, but really they were the one team doing it. I have a hard time with that, especially looking at that book and seeing that the Yankees and Red Sox really got less than a slap on the wrist. Anyway, here's a clip from that interview that I did. The whole thing is up at youtube.com/Paul Gallant.
I mean, look, there's been other, people throw the Brewers around, the Rockies around, the Diamondbacks. You hear all these outside allegations of different teams, right? And again, when that's being referred to, they're talking, to my knowledge, about an allegation of that base runner system, not what the Astros are doing. But the reality is we don't have evidence of it, right? I think it is based on how we know this spread. It went from veteran Chris Young, the outfielder, former outfielder, now he's a broadcaster, went from the Yankees to the Red Sox, got to the Red Sox, says you guys aren't doing it. Beltran, same thing, comes to Houston. But even if let's just take the hypothetical that 5 other teams besides the Red Sox, Yankees, Dodgers were using a base runner system. Does that then, get the Astros off the hook for doing a system beyond the base runner system? Certainly, Major League Baseball is culpable in the rise of this scandal. They brought the video rooms into the sport. The commissioner had a lot of experience in PEDs and somehow didn't realize what giving these technological tools to teams would do. So, the conditions that allow sign stealing to rise and spread, they're complex. They're not singular. Mm-hmm. But, look, the reality is Astros fans and any fans of any team that's caught for something, it boils down to deflection and trying to justify the behavior. And so really at the end of the day, the question is, does another team cheating in any way justify your cheating? You can choose yes or no. And then does how you cheat matter? Does going much further than any other team is known to have matter, right? If people want to stand out there and say, oh, I bet other teams are doing exactly what the Astros are doing or worse. Well, you can say, I can't stop you from holding that belief. But as a reporter, and I think, anybody.
Yeah, I get where you're going with here, Evan. And to pause that interview right there, that's where I started to push back a little bit. Now, Evan brings up the point that some Astros fans are bringing up the idea that other teams cheated as a means to justify what they did. But no, most Astros fans are just like, what the fuck? There were other teams doing this, and the Astros were the ones singled out. Maybe they are more guilty because there was a memo sent out across baseball. But I don't think that the sign stealing stopped because of the memo. I think that baseball did look for just one team to perhaps focus on. But the problem is, as Evan laid out there, and I think some people are being a little bit unfair with him on, is that he only has the facts with which to work. This isn't a book based off of speculation. This is a book based off of information that he was able to corroborate with ex-players. And this is where I'm getting into a question that's maybe more of a philosophical one. When you listen to a radio interview or an interview that's done with somebody that you disagree with or dislike, what are you looking for in that interview? There were a couple of people that were tweeting at me during said interview, not that the interview was soft necessarily, but that I didn't go hard enough at him. And my question is, well, what the fuck am I supposed to go hard at him with? I get the sentiment. You want me to cape for the Astros, your hometown team, in this situation. I would like to myself, because I do think it's kind of crazy that they have been singled out when it does feel like other teams were doing their own versions of this. There is a passage that outlines what the Dodgers may have been doing, but there's nothing to corroborate it. And of course, there's plenty of pages about the Yankees and the Red Sox, what they were doing, and what the Yankees may have continued to do. I don't know what I'm supposed to come back with Evan, though, presenting alternative facts when it really is a matter of, do you talk to people on the ground floor of this stuff that said, yeah, cheating was going on? And while it did seem like there were people willing to speak on it, with the Red Sox and Yankees from way back in the day, with that story that came out, when it comes to anything at the same time as the Houston Astros in 2017 and beyond, everyone seems to be zipped up. Why? I don't know. I don't know if Rob Manfred told everyone to shut the fuck up. I don't know if there's some sort of embargo in place, but it's pretty clear that no one's doing any more digging. And that is on baseball. My question in this situation, though, is again, like, what do you want out of somebody who is hosting a radio show and is interviewing someone like this? I like to have a fair conversation. And all I could go off of is the facts that he's reported to. I wish I had some extra expertise in it. I suppose, as Ben DeBose brought up on Twitter, that I could take a look at some of the statistics that were brought up about how much of an advantage the Astros got from the actual sign stealing. There's some data out there, but that data is subjective. Do we really know that it helped? Did it hurt? I could bring that to push back, because he at one point said this is like arguing speeding at 90 miles per hour in a 60 mile per hour zone versus 130 miles per hour in a 60 mile per hour zone. Okay, I mean, that's a slippery slope to go down too when we're talking about metaphors and such. But I'm curious as to what y'all want. So answer that in the comments, youtube.com/Paul Gallant, twitch.tv/Gallant says. I did want to transition into the topics that we have from today in the NFL. Yesterday, Derek Carr was officially released as Raiders quarterback, meaning he is a free agent, and meaning that the Houston Texans, who should be in the market for a quarterback, could potentially bring him in. I feel bad for Derek Carr. This is a video clip from 2021 where Carr said that he hopes he remains with the Raiders for life.
Don't want to do it anywhere else. I've said it over and over again. I'd probably quit football if I had to play for somebody else. You know, I am a Raider for my entire life. I'm going to root for one team for the rest of my life, and it's the Raiders. So
I feel bad for him. You have that loyalty to a franchise. You take a little bit less money so that things can work. For Devontae Adams coming on the books last season, and then they just kick you out the door. But that's the NFL. Not for long. You got to deliver. And the sad thing with Derek Carr, this year in particular, he really didn't deliver, and supposedly he didn't do very well under a much tougher coaching staff led by Josh McDaniels, who comes over from the Patriots. It's not to say that he was a bad teammate or handled the coaching poorly. It was just different for him per reports. He'd never been coached quite that hard. And look, organization to organization across the NFL, the degree to which coaches are hard on players varies. Doesn't seem like they're very hard on players in Los Angeles with the Chargers. It's one of those things where you can't really, I think, determine that one place is the end-all be-all and every single organization should operate that way. But that's something that it doesn't seem like Carr is the biggest fan of. Also seems like he got some special treatment while there. But anyway, let's shift back to Derek Carr, who is now a free agent. The Texans should, at the very least, pick up the phone and call. I've said this before, especially if they don't have to trade for him. And I got a couple of reasons as to why it makes sense for the Houston Texans to, try to bring him in. One, you have the cap space to make a short-term deal work. And assuming he accepts it, you now have flexibility with your first pick. You don't have to take a quarterback at number 2 overall. I think that's huge. And I know that some people want them to take a quarterback at 2 overall anyway, and maybe they will, but if they're not picking first overall, which yesterday I advocated for, well, if they really like a guy, trade up to number 1 and draft that quarterback. Say they don't have that option. Okay, well, with that number 2 overall pick, if you have a placeholder quarterback, and Davis Mills is not a placeholder quarterback, fuck off with that. He's not. I'm done with him. We all deserve a more watchable product. Carr is that. There's some veteran leadership that he would bring to the table. He has some familiarity with the organization, given that his brother was the first pick ever of the Houston Texans. He knows the ownership too. So maybe there's a chance. I would like to have flexibility with that first pick so that maybe you could draft a quarterback a little bit later. Anthony Richardson supposedly going to go within the top 10. Hendon Hooker seems like he's going to be a 2nd or 3rd round pick. But I don't think it's a great spot to be in, to be hoping that at that number 2 overall pick, the quarterback you like falls to you, that the Chicago Bears don't trade out of that spot, that the Chicago Bears don't reverse course and decide to move on from Justin Fields and draft one of those 3 consensus top quarterbacks. That's Bryce Young from Alabama, that's C.J. Stroud from Ohio State, and that's also Will Levis from Kentucky. Josu Colon on youtube.com/Paul Gallant says that Derek Carr would be option C. My thoughts on youtube.com/Paul Gallant says they should go after Carr. How many different coordinators and coaches did he have? The Raiders are a mess too. And that's not to say, I hope, my thoughts, that Carr is going to suddenly find something he was unable to find before in Houston versus anywhere else, but specifically Vegas, because that's the only place he's been. I guess you could say Fresno State too. I don't expect more out of him in Houston, but I expect more out of him than I do out of a Davis Mills. And you're wasting your time with Davis Mills, who can actually improve when the quarterback's just not good. He can't make throws to the sideline. He's not mobile. He can't extend plays. How does anyone improve if you're just going 3 and out on a regular basis and the offense can't move at all? You don't. And everyone loses morale, and the place ends up being bad. Derpy Entertainment at youtube.com/Paul Gallant says, honestly, my friend, all options are on the table for the Houston Texans because they suck and need everything. So, yeah, Derek Carr should be an option for them. And look, say you do draft the quarterback 2nd overall or 1st overall. You don't have to throw that guy right in if you have Derek Carr. You don't. I know some people are like, well, go ahead with Davis Mills next year. And I'm just going to keep on saying, fuck off with that. No, absolutely not. But you can put whatever rookie you take in as a meat shield behind Derek Carr, who can take the pounding that he's likely going to take given the bad interior of the Texans' offensive line. This is something they should think about. Is it something they'll do? That's another story. But I feel like picking up the phone and making a call does not hurt you at all. Bringing him in does not hurt you at all. He is unlikely to be looking for a long-term deal. Now, he might be looking to play for a contender, but he knows that he's probably not going to get a long-term deal from any contender out there. I would imagine the most that he'll get is what would be a 3-year deal that is essentially a 2-year deal that would give the team that signs him the flexibility to potentially get out from underneath that contract after just 1 season. So why not with Derek Carr? That's my mindset. I know maybe it's not the most exciting thing, but it's not like you pick Derek Carr and you are completely canceling your ability to go bring in one of those younger quarterbacks. And there's something else with Derek Carr that I don't think is discussed enough. Derek Carr is a somewhat sensitive, and I don't mean it as a diss, guy who says interesting things. Maybe he's not super deep, and I say that with extreme quotation marks around it, like Aaron Rodgers, but he gets chippy from time to time. He's got what seems to be a pretty big chip on his shoulder that at the very least the Chiefs and the Bengals and every team in the AFC playoffs would say, oh, okay. And also, there's something else that you have to listen to, that you have to listen for to hear. Here's Derek Carr at the podium on April 13th of this year.
I went through a heartbreak already last time I signed my contract. My best friend left, you know what I mean? And I didn't want that to ever happen again. And so this was an opportunity for me to prove to the team, to the organization, to our fans that the way we're going to structure this is so that we can keep, everybody together and really have real continuity, really have something to build on.
He mentions why he signed the extension that he did, and it's going to help everybody out. But what I find funny about it is you heard it, right? You heard what I'm hearing? The guy's got a Southern accent, and he's from Bakersfield, California. How the fuck does that happen? And I know he spent some time in Sugar Land after his brother David got the gig as the Houston Texans quarterback. But where did this Southern accent come from? Is it possible for me to develop a Southern accent later in life? Should I try one on for size? Let me tell you what about Derek Carr. The man's a gentleman. This man understands what it's like to be raised south of the Mason-Dixon line in Bakersfield, California, which I believe is pretty north as far as California goes. Anyway, here is more Derek Carr talking about his contract extension and being sensitive, which is something I like about Carr. He does not like to be doubted. Here is the former Raiders, now free agent quarterback.
The question of can I win a playoff game? Yeah, that's ridiculous. Yes, just because we had one chance and we lost in the last series of a game to the AFC champions, yeah, I think we can, and it just shows you how close we were. But with that said, 55% of the teams that make the playoffs the next year don't.
Blah, 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 blah. Now he's doing a little bit of math on the fly. So that's a less extreme example of it, but he does not like the idea that he can't win a playoff game. And honestly, they probably would have beaten the Raiders, the Houston Texans, when they played them back in the playoffs in 2016. Anyone remember that game? Brock Osweiler under center against Connor fucking Cook? Yikes. That was not a fun game to watch. Here's more Derek Carr. This time, he gets into a back and forth with Raiders reporter Paul Gutierrez.
Is the expectation, all that kind of stuff, who says it? Honestly, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't. Whether they don't say anything or they say a lot, nobody cares. Hopefully they talk about us at the end. You know what I mean? But right now, that crap don't matter.
It doesn't matter, Derek. Why do you talk about it and why do you?
Thank you, Paul. It's so good to see you. I say it because I'm a positive person, and I try and I try and encourage my teammates. There's a way that I say things to encourage my locker room, to maybe put a chip on their shoulder, and sometimes I do it too much. And so I don't appreciate your tone either. You can pump that back a little bit.
I don't appreciate your tone either. You can pump that back a little bit. I want this guy here. I mean, goddamn, Davis Mills was like listening to paint dry whenever he spoke, and you had Lovie Smith on top of that. This team was just fucking boring last year. Give me someone with a little energy. Give me someone who's going to push back when the team is going through struggles. Twitch.tv/Galan says, I already muted you, says, one car was enough, LOL. But he's the fun car. It's not like you're committing to him long-term either. You'd be signing him for a couple of years. You put him in. You use him as a meat shield for whatever young quarterback comes afterwards. What's wrong with that? And he's got a Southern accent for some reason. That makes no sense. And he's a little bit sensitive. And sometimes he looks like he's perhaps in some sort of, I don't know, early 2000s metal band. He's got very long lashes. Looks like he maybe has some like smoky eyeshadow underneath. I don't know, borderline emo. I want someone new, someone different. Give me someone that's fucking entertaining, please. Or just different. Davis Mills and Lovie Smith. It wasn't just bad on the field. It was fucking boring. That's what I'm looking for. I already muted you asks, where is Derek Carr on your tier list? He is very similar to Dak, skill-wise to me. No, Dak's way more mobile. And I know that's going to sound racist, but Dak is way more mobile. He is. He doesn't like to run as much as he can, but Dak has shown that he has the ability to run. Derek Carr is a better version of Jimmy Garoppolo. I think that's the best comparison to make. The big problem for Carr is that while he can have some great games, which Garoppolo can't, he will have games where he throws a lot of careless interceptions. And look, not every quarterback is super perfect when it comes to being careful. And a lot of those game manager types that are, that's not something you really want to stick behind. Want some more Derek Carr? I think we have some more Derek Carr, being a little bit borderline sensitive here. And I want this guy as the starting quarterback of the Houston Texans, at least in the short term, while they fix the interior of their offensive line. And it doesn't force them to throw a young quarterback into the fire, where generally you get to find out whether or not a quarterback's going to work out if you do that with him. But I think it would be smart for the Houston Texans in this spot to make sure that whoever's under center is not going to come into the league and consistently be getting his ass kicked on Sunday to Sunday. Get your short-term meat shield. Here's more Derek Carr.
Other Mountain West guys. I see UNLV, 2 UNLV hats today. No offense, but the defenses are a little more complicated and all that kind of stuff. But it does, like when we connect on one, I have had thoughts of like remembering a play that, oh, we did that against that team or something like that. So yeah, I have those thoughts, but it's definitely different.
There was a story that came out on Saturday, Tom Brady, Dana White.
Yep.
First of all, any thoughts on that? And then also, are you kind of immune to all the nonsense?
By now, yeah. I would hope so. I mean, it is what it is. For me, like, I didn't even hear about it. We actually had within the building, someone lost a family member. So, like, I was so immersed in that and just talking to that person and that kind of stuff that it really was. It was a moment to really put things in perspective. Like, I've had seasons where I didn't play in the preseason.
So they randomly cut out that part of the interview on YouTube, and I think it's because that clip ended up going viral. It was when he was asked about Dana White and the interview I think he did with Tom Brady, where Brady was talking about how like the team wanted to keep that motherfucker over there. And everyone was wondering who was the quarterback. Was it Ryan Fitzpatrick? Was it Derek Carr? Was it somebody else? And I mean, it's a little annoying that Carr's like, well, I was talking with somebody who lost their family member. And it puts things in perspective right there. A tad annoying there, but there's always a bit of a chip on his shoulder. He actually handled that question pretty well. I already muted you, asks twitch.tv/Gallant says, did he cut his own shirt? It does look like he cut his own shirt here. Who hasn't done that before? But yeah, that's him cutting his own shirt. That shirt seems like it's a custom one too. Anyway, I don't know. Where'd you get that one? While we're on quarterbacks, anyone want to talk about Aaron Rodgers? Aaron Rodgers was on the Pat McAfee show on yesterday, which is, we're recording this on a Wednesday. This was Tuesday. And McAfee asked Rodgers when he's going on his darkness retreat, because he was supposed to have gone on that darkness retreat before. I'm just going to play some Aaron Rodgers for you, and we will pause along the way, because goddamn, Aaron Rodgers does a great job of being the most Aaron Rodgers he can.
Listen, I'm not in my darkness retreat yet.
What?
Oh,
yesterday. What?
Nope. This thing has been planned for about 4 months, and it was always the same date, always the end of this week.
Oh.
So anybody with knowledge to the opposite of that, it's fake news.
Whoa.
So let me just reiterate one more time. There's an inner circle, right? And in my inner circle, nobody talks to Ian Rappaport, to Adam Schefter, or to any of those people. Okay? So if you're one of those people who's talking to those people, it's a great reminder for you, you're not in the inner circle.
Oh! Damn. That was hanging on somebody there. Yeah.
And if anybody else is out there saying stuff, or if they're just making it up, which is also, those are both likely, just stop with the fake news.
Stop with the fake news. And this is legitimately about whether or not he was going on his darkness retreat yesterday or tomorrow. This is fake news. And this is where Rodgers starts to get borderline condescending, reminding people that when it comes to whether or not he's going on his darkness retreat, you gotta wonder if it's coming straight from the source.
Okay, so I speak for myself.
Yep.
And I will continue to do that. I'm not upset about it. Like, it's the classic media, you know, trying to be first, not trying to be right. And the problem is there's a slippery slope. So,
okay, but we're talking about dates. We're not talking about the facts being wrong here, Aaron. It's just dates. They were right on that front. The specifics not being all the way right, being first. Oh, okay. I mean, there's probably an element to that, but come on. He just fucked the date up. This is like the time that Brock Osweiler threw an interception, and I asked Bill O'Brien about it the next day. I asked O'Brien, hey, listen, Bill, what's going on with, let me see if I actually can find this. Bill O'Brien tight TEs. No, I can't find it on my computer. But I asked Bill O'Brien a question about like an interception that I thought was thrown to Ryan Griffin. He said, like, actually, that was thrown to CJ Fedorowicz. And he goes off on this rant like, oh, you weren't right. I was like, actually, I was. It was a fucking interception, Bill. It doesn't matter who it was thrown to. And then, yeah, I already muted you, as he points out, twitch.tv/Gallant says, yeah, you living in the hindsight today, Paul. Yeah, that's what O'Brien said to me right there. And I remember I was like, well, that doesn't matter. The question is, like, hey, why did he throw that interception? Anyway, here's more Aaron Rodgers essentially talking down to you.
But let me just remind everybody out there listening, when somebody says something, whether it's Ian Rappaport,
right,
or Adam Schefter,
right,
okay, Joe Biden,
well, all right,
Donald Trump,
yeah, all right, what?
Anthony Fauci,
what? Okay, here we go.
Joe Rogan, myself, anybody, question it. If it's legitimate, it can stand up to questioning. So question things and then think about them and contemplate them in your own time and try and figure out what seems most likely to be true based on your own intuition and feel and conglomeration of fact. But no one in my inner circle talks to those people.
Okay, blah, 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 blah. Look, you don't need to question everything. Otherwise, you would just come across as like a stoned philosopher at all moments. What is life? Are we in a simulation? What's going on? Like, fuck off with that, Aaron. Question some things that deserve skepticism, sure, but if you question everything, you run the risk of being someone who goes full QAnon. Or if you want to make everything fair and balanced, someone who's still believing that, like, in Russiagate, you know, there's a certain point where you need to accept that some things are reality and that it's not necessarily worth questioning any further. If you do it with everything, you're going to exhaust yourself. Speaking of exhausting, that's what I would call the conversation about Lamar Jackson's future over the past year. Same way I would talk about Aaron Rodgers' future, which has been discussed the last 4 off seasons, or Russell Wilson when I was in Seattle. You might have remembered this from January, so basically a month ago. John Harbaugh, head coach of the Baltimore Ravens, had this to say about Lamar Jackson's future in Baltimore.
100%, 200%. There's no question about it. Lamar Jackson is our quarterback. I mean, he's been our quarterback. Everything we've done in terms of building our offense and building our team how we think in terms of people and put people around him is based on this incredible young man and his talent, his ability, and his competitiveness. You know, he and I were talking today too, and one of the things about Lamar that to me stands out, he's an incredible competitor. I mean, Lamar Jackson, all he wants to do is win at everything he does. You know, yeah, he's got a lot of talent. He's a very bright guy. He's got a big heart, but he's just a massive competitor. And that's the kind of guys we want to build this team around, guys that love football and guys that love to compete. So hasn't changed. It'll never change. I've loved Lamar. Eric loves Lamar. And it's not going to change in the future. So, you know, I don't know anything about the details of the whole thing, but I know one thing. I'm like all the fans out there and everybody else. You know, I'll have my fingers crossed and my toes crossed, and I'll be saying prayers. And I have every faith that it's going to get done. And
so the first part, John Harbaugh says he wants Lamar Jackson back. Second part, though, he doesn't seem so sure, right? We've heard that from a couple of coaches over the last couple of years. I would specifically point to Pete Carroll. Pete Carroll wanted Russell Wilson, I think, to stay to a degree, and that was the plan for this past season, but Wilson kept pushing and pushing and pushing John Schneider, and the Seahawks eventually decided to trade him. But what's tricky about this is a report that came from Jordan Schultz and Dan Wilkins today at The Score. The Baltimore Ravens didn't provide full assurances that Lamar Jackson would return as the team's quarterback in 2023 while conducting offensive coordinator interviews. Jackson is expected to receive the franchise tag this offseason, keeping him off the free agent market after he played out the final year of his rookie contract. That's definitely going to happen. The Ravens would be fucking idiots if they let Lamar Jackson hit free agency. They sign him to a franchise tag, they at the very least can try to trade him somewhere. The two sides' continued lack of progress towards a long-term deal could potentially open the door for teams around the league to tempt the Ravens with trade offers. Baltimore wants Jackson to return, but the organization is currently unsure how the situation with its star quarterback will unfold in the coming weeks, sources said. And to go a little bit further, per the NFL Network, the Ravens intend to keep Lamar Jackson, but they could be swayed to trade him with a Godfather offer. If no long-term deal is reached, the Ravens would consider trading the 26-year-old. He's only 26-year-old quarterback for a windfall of draft picks per Ian Rappaport. We'll see how this one plays out. I assume that there's a good chance Lamar Jackson gets traded, but that shouldn't be the case. He's a good quarterback. They need to bring in somebody that knows how to develop him as a quarterback. Greg Roman knew how to create an exotic running game. But Lamar Jackson, if you watched him at Louisville, is somebody that actually was pretty good as a drop-back quarterback. Give him some weapons and give him an offense that actually lends itself towards him improving as a passer. And I think he will succeed. Maybe he won't be the most accurate guy out there, but I don't think, have done a great job of developing him further than using him the way that they do and his elite running abilities. One of the best running quarterbacks we've ever seen. Though Jalen Hurts is maybe giving him a run for his money with the start that he had. I already muted you about the price for Lamar Jackson. I don't think they can get 3 firsts for Lamar because then you're going to have to open the wallet. Well, I mean, what happened with Deshaun Watson? What happened with Russell Wilson? Honestly, it's probably going to be a Deshaun Watson kind of haul. The real question is, are you going to be willing to give Jackson what Deshaun Watson got? Because that apparently is the sticking point, a fully guaranteed contract. Man, you give Lamar Jackson a fully guaranteed contract, that's something I push back against just a little bit, mainly because of the fact that Jackson is someone who plays in a way where you could see him getting hurt. Anyway. That's going to wrap up today's edition of the Gallant Says podcast. Appreciate you joining me. Sorry for the late start the last couple of days. We've had things going on after the show, and in particular today, I wanted to at least get a brief listen back to the actual interview itself that I did with Evan Drellich. You can get this podcast and listen to it. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. But you can also watch it live weekdays generally, 1 to 1:30 Central Time at twitch.tv/Gallant Says, youtube.com/Paul Gallant. I am merely Paul Gallant. So long, farewell. Have a wonderful Wednesday. We'll be back at it tomorrow.